Good evening, Reston. Welcome to Reston Impact. I'm your host, John Lovis, as usual, but not so usual. I've got an exceptional guest this evening who's played an amazing role in the recent commission to look at police practices in Fairfax County. He is Phil Niedzielski-Eichner, chairman of the Use of Force Subcommittee of the Police Practices Commission. I call it a reform commission. That was never in the name. I made that up. In any case, Phil, welcome.
John, good to be here.
Welcome to Reston, and welcome to Reston Impact. That was quite an experience, serving on that commission. And what was it? We started in spring of 2015 and went up to October of 2000.
Yeah, about almost 9 months from beginning to the point at which the report was delivered to the board.
And there were about 40 of us, and then they opened it up to people who were interested in specific areas of work so that more people got to participate.
Right, so my subcommittee had probably, it was half members of the commission and then half of other citizens who had an interest, and so it was about 15 people total.
Yeah, that's a pretty good, that's almost a maximum size group to be able to get any work done.
Yeah.
40 was well beyond a group that you can do any work with, so they did break it down. Let's begin, if we could, though. You're a newbie out here in Reston, and if you would be so kind as to tell our viewers a bit about yourself. Where do you come from originally, and what are some highlights of your professional life in particular that led you to being interested in participating in the commission in the first place, Phil?
Happy to give you some background. I actually am from Columbus, Ohio. Grew up there. Went to school in Cleveland, Ohio, undergrad.
Cleveland, I've heard of it, okay.
Recently. And Ohio State for my grad work.
Oh, be darned.
So
okay.
I'm a Buckeye.
Okay.
My wife and I have been married 42 years. She's actually a Michigan graduate, so you can imagine on
oh my goodness.
In the fall, life is interesting because we both enjoy the football aspect. Have two daughters who are now well along in their own lives. They're 37, 36.
How do they get that old?
It just happens, John. But they're both graduates of our school system. So I'm going to come back to that because part of what public service is in this community is giving back to the community. So we came here in '88.
To Fairfax County?
To Fairfax County. We've been here since. So we started out in Chantilly, then relocated over here to Oakton once the kids, it's south of here, but into Oakton once our kids were off to college. Mm-hmm. Professionally, I've been in my career for about 37 years, and most of
so you're still working. You're not an old retired guy like that. You work for a living. Okay.
I'm working still. I have a startup firm that's does public policy work, consulting, but also I'm really intrigued, John, with this idea of use of digital technology for improving how the government works for the people in the policy-making area. So we have some frustrated people, a fair amount of frustrated people who are kind of frustrated with the way in which the government's working. My belief is that these digital technologies offer an opportunity to bring people closer together to their government.
Really?
So I'm working on how to do that, and my firm's working on how to do that.
You don't have just a sort of a wild hair example out there that I'm trying to relate to that.
Yeah. So you think of Wikipedia.
Okay.
So Wikipedia.
I think of WikiLeaks, but I can also think of Wikipedia.
So Wikipedia is a platform for thousands of people to provide information
Public
into.
Platform, yeah.
It's curated. In other words, there are people who monitor it. But the wiki as a software is publicly available, used for any purpose you want. So you could create a wiki process that involves hundreds of people on a particular topic of interest.
Wiki being a software process that enables you to fiddle with a document through
words in, words out.
Through the ether of,
Right. So you could have 500 people working at their home stations, engaged on editing a document. you could, in a real disruptive sense, you could even envision legislation being crafted in a way that allows for the public to communicate in a different way to their representative. Instead of saying, I wish we could do this, you would say, we've 500 of us got together, we crafted this piece of legislation.
Right.
And this is what we think would be a solution, a way in which you can solve this problem.
Is there an example where something like this has worked, like at a local level or something, that kind of thing, Phil? I mean, it boggles my mind if you think of it at a federal level, but if maybe at a township or something.
Well, you're familiar with master planning.
Yeah.
So at the local level, we have zoning, we have master plans.
Right.
The master planning process involves the public in commenting on
Right.
a document that the professional staff has produced as the professional staff's view of what the best plan
Right.
is. The public comments on that. They say, well, we like this, we don't like this. Well, one interesting prospect would be, well, what would the possibilities be if that plan, that draft plan, were open to the public to actually edit and provide
my mind, I got to tell you, my mind is boggled by that concept.
But it's doable, John. It has to be curated. In other words, it's by curated, it has to be monitored and managed in a way.
There has to be a process manager somewhere that
but the technology
lets people do that.
The technology is there to do that. It's not just Wiki as a potential platform. There are other potential platforms. Google has a tool that could be used for that purpose. So that's intriguing to me. I'm very interested in what, in this part of my career, I've had, all of my career has been focused on the public service and public sector, state, local.
And your company is called Government Dynamics.
Governmental Dynamics, and it's a benefit corporation, and that's a new capability that the Virginia has established in law that allows me to establish my corporation not only for the purpose of making profit, which all corporations are required to do if you have a board of directors, but also you can if you demonstrate that you have a benefit, that's something else.
A societal benefit.
Societal benefit. So I'm intrigued by.
How long have you been at this?
Year and a half. So answering an earlier question, I left the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. I had 6 years of service in the Obama administration. I'm honored to have been part of the administration. I did very interesting work. My last task within that administration was Chief of Staff to the Chairman of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission.
Okay, that sounds like interesting work.
100 nuclear reactors in the United States, 20% of our baseload electric power. There's risks to the technology. The NRC regulates the technology to ensure that those risks are minimized to the greatest extent possible.
That includes the disposal of the waste of the nuclear process?
That's correct.
Which is a whole industry of its own, which will go on forever because we've never resolved the problem, have we?
No, and in fact, it's interesting you should point that out.
I know a guy who's been very much engaged in it. That's how it happened.
And I was part of, I led a effort on the part of the administration to review a major Blue Ribbon Commission report that was conducted on how to get the nuclear waste issue back on track. And I led that effort for the administration and was pleased with the way in which that came out. But yeah, so if you think of my career, John, it's public policy, it's energy, but it's very much focused on things nuclear. From national security, nuclear weapons, to the supply of nuclear power And
you told me before we came on the air that you had a degree in public administration. I was having trouble relating that to nuclear power, but I can relate it a lot more easily now because you're interested in so much the processes of it.
Yeah, but as in I'm sure in your life, and it was completely by accident for me.
Oh, really?
It's just I was in local government. I had an opportunity to work in the city of Oak Ridge, Tennessee, which I'm sure you remember is one of the 3 sites for the development of the nuclear weapons program back in the 40s. And by just serendipity, somebody needed me to do some things related to nuclear waste, and that was the start.
I have some of those kinds of things in my background as well. That because I was in a certain place at a certain time, something happened that definitely wasn't in the master plan, shall we say.
Then, I had the opportunity, finish this up, but Jerry Connolly approached me when I had moved into the Providence district, so there were these 8 districts in Fairfax, and Providence being one of them. And Ernestine Hasty was on the school board.
Remember?
She decided she was not going to run again.
That's how you got in the school
And
board.
so then I think Jerry was the
still
chairman.
or was he chairman by then?
He was
Yeah.
chairman, I think, at that time. And then he approached me about running for the school board, and I did.
And
So I spent 5 years. I had 2 elections. I had to short circuit my second term because of my opportunity to serve in the Obama administration.
Outstanding. So the school board, that's important service. And
It was incredible service, John.
important work. What's the highlight?
Well, it was just you serve. There's nothing more fundamental than educating
Our youth.
Our youth.
Yeah.
And it's not an easy task, and there are complications that are always on the horizon, and you always have to deal with them, and it was a challenge.
Well, just surviving sometimes seems to be the challenge. Doing what's right for kids and doing what's the best thing to make them make maximum use of their potential and be the best contributors they can be and have a satisfying life. That's fairly tricky, hard work, and it turns out not that easy.
Both my parents were teachers too, so that was another.
It was in the
incentive.
blood.
Yeah.
We do digress here. Let's come back to the commission, and I love
So,
that.
quick
I love to have people digress. By the way.
Quick response though. Then, so when I left the government, I was aware of the controversy in Fairfax because even though I was
The John Gear matter or others?
John Gear and others.
Yeah.
I knew that the police issues were one that the Board of Supervisors were confronting, and I reached out to the chairman of the Board of Supervisors. I said, look, I'm now able to return to giving some focus locally. I'd like to help you. I understand you have this challenge with you're setting up this commission. Anything I can do. And long and short is I was appointed then by her to be the chair of the Use of Force Subcommittee.
Oh, Chairman Bulova appointed you to that, not Mike Hirschman, because I was going to say that next that when we sat down with this 40-member commission that you and I both served on, the chairman was Michael Hirschman, who
Right.
I thought did an outstanding job.
He did, yes, absolutely.
And I thought he was the one who divided us up into the 5 subcommittees, and you were named chair, but Chairman Bulova had named the
Well,
chairs
you'll recall that Sharon Bulova was active
at the beginning in particular.
in setting up the commission, and then when the full commission was meeting, she was always at the table.
Yes.
And
And she always would always speak a little bit at the beginning of meetings and kind of set a tone.
So she worked with Michael to set up the framework, the 5 subcommittees, and Michael took ownership of those of the 5 subcommittees, but she was instrumental in naming the chair of each of those subcommittees.
Okay, very good. When the commission, he did divide. I guess it was the second or third meeting we set up the subcommittees, and subcommittees are the ad hoc commission to review police practices, I think was the formal name. The 5 subcommittees were use of force, communications, mental health and crisis intervention, which had a much bigger role in police work than I realized when I first sat down with its commission.
Yeah.
Independent oversight and investigation, and the last one was recruitment and diversity, maybe one other word there, but recruitment and diversity of the force, basically. And if you take those 5 together, it seemed to me like that was you take those subsets, put them together, that's a pretty comprehensive framework for reform. And you were assigned by Chairman Bulova to be the chair of the biggest piece of it in terms of the breadth of the subject matter in particular, I thought. And the use of force was kind of what everybody said, well, that's what got us here in the first place, the problem with the use of force in the police. How was your mission defined when you set about being the use of force chair, Bill?
Well, for each of the subcommittees, Michael and Chairman Bulova worked out a scope of work. I call it a charge, and so we received that charge, and we, as a subcommittee, reviewed it and decided that it was one that, if there's any changes we wanted to recommend. Bottom line is what we ended up being charged with, John, is to review use of force incidents. and there are 35, I think, within a 10-year period that we reviewed. I want to clarify, to review, not investigate.
When you say use of force incident, you mean where somebody is killed?
Yeah, officer-involved shooting.
Officer-involved shootings.
Yes, specifically, let me just make sure I've shared this with you correctly. So lethal and non-lethal use of force incidents involving the police department. And then we also were charged with looking at any data that was available that would give us perspective about the history of use of force in the county. And then we looked at the policies and practices and procedures that the department operates within relative to use of force. We looked at the best practices nationally. The Department of Justice had done a number of
landmark studies.
We benefited from all of those. Good examples. We all know the one with regard to Ferguson. There was a DOJ report on Cleveland, Ohio, Philadelphia. We also benefited from the report of the President's Task Force on 21st Century Policing. Mm-hmm. And there are a number of others, but we were charged with looking at best practices. Compare how our department conducts its use of force practices and policies in relation to the national best practice norms.
And practices that came out of crisis situations. Yes. in urban areas, right. Largely, where there were final reports and programs were implemented, reforms were implemented, and there was enough of a record to say, hey, we got some things that are working, probably some things that weren't working as well, but you had some real credible sources to look at in terms of identifying some best practices.
Yes, and you'll recall, John, that the police PERF, I think the Police Executive Research Forum.
Yeah.
Also produced a report, and that report was actually a study that was undertaken by the police chief prior to this commission being established. So, example of Chief Rossler, Ed Rossler.
Chief of Police of Fairfax County.
New Chief of Police. New Chief of Police. He comes in and says, look, I want to get a baseline understanding of how we do things, how we're doing relative to use of force matters. Because there was, when he was coming into his role, there were some controversies, national controversies coming to light, and he wanted to understand whether his department that he was just taking ownership of, responsibility for, how it stood. And so PERF came in, they conducted their study.
PERF is Police Executive Research Forum. They're a widely respected consulting firm, but they're made up of people with tremendous amount of police experience at the executive level, and they can come in and look at a force, and they're credible. They're probably the gold standard in terms of credible consulting in this public safety field. Is that a
that's an excellent way of
statement?
Describing them.
Okay.
So they had their work that they were doing, and it was some portion of it was parallel with the work we were doing. We were hoping to dovetail the two of them, and we ultimately were able to, but it took a little bit longer for the PERF folks to complete their work, and we didn't benefit from their recommendations than more the tail end of our study. I would note just one thing, that there, with specific, John, with regard to the Gear incident, and I don't know if your public
Let's recall, John Gear was the man in Springfield, Virginia, who was standing in a screen door talking to police officers. Had probably been drinking heavily, and it arose out of a domestic dispute, and he was talking to police officers. He'd been talking to them for 40 minutes or so. And one of the officers during most of that time had his gun drawn while the others did not. And at some point, that officer decided to shoot Mr. Gear while Mr. Gear's hands were in this position on the screen door. The officer swore that he'd moved for his gun, and he was the only one who saw that. The other officers did not see that. And then we went through the horrible 18-month period where the Board of Supervisors and the police department clammed up and wouldn't tell people basically what was going on. Turned out, as you've talked to me about before we come on the program here, there were some things going on within Fairfax County government involving legal advice, et cetera, that helped lead to that. It still led to an inexplicable period of silence that ultimately led to the creation of the commission.
It became so controversial a situation that it ultimately led to the chairman of the board recommending to her colleagues that they've got to take a look at this in more detail. And
thus our commission.
Thus our commission. The one thing that we were charged with, I wanted to get to this just because it remains an outlier of a need for the county to take on, and that is that that we were charged with looking at the relationship between the police department, the department or the county's own council, and then the
Commonwealth Attorney?
Commonwealth's attorney. Time-wise, we simply weren't able to really delve into that to the level of detail that would make any worthwhile recommendations coming out of it. That's still a task, I think, that the county, I know, is working on. I think there's a new county attorney. The board has given additional directions to the county attorney as to how they want to be advised on these matters.
The old county attorney hasn't left yet, has he?
He's retired.
Really? I thought he was retiring he retired this June, I guess, yeah. Okay.
So that relationship with the Commonwealth's attorney got a little bit, it was difficult during this time period, and there's a lot of effort being made to bring those parties together again. It probably is something that the county will want to continue to work on because it was fundamental to the matter of communication.
It's like everything in this area, though. It seems that's not an easy, and that's a complicated matter.
Yeah.
Having some kind of separation between the police and the Commonwealth Attorney is not an altogether bad thing.
Right.
Because the record shows, in my humble opinion, that over 45 years, no police officer was ever charged with anything, any wrongdoing in terms of killing somebody in this county. And part of that seems to come from the unnaturally close relationship between the Commonwealth Attorney and the police department investigating officer-involved shootings or killings.
I'll tell you, John, I don't have that history, so I want to be careful.
Well, the history of not charging anybody
right.
is unquestioned.
But
the whys, yeah.
But the reason why
right.
That is very complicated. It has it is broadly involved with this matter of the authorities that we invest in our officers, sanctioned by the Supreme Court. That if in the way in which they exercise their judgment in split-second moments, it has to be reasonable. We called for in our report that the standard be objectively reasonable, which means that if an officer does shoot an individual, that any outside observer watching that circumstance would objectively say that officer was being reasonable in the conduct of his or her responsibilities.
And there's boy.
So it's quite complicated.
It's very I think that part of what I learned in going through this that none of these things that I may have thought were relatively black and white and clear cut were not that way at all. And the Commonwealth Attorney relationship with the police is a very good example. Commonwealth Attorney has really very little resources with which to investigate a police shooting, for example, and is dependent upon the fellows in blue to provide the manpower and the expertise to do a lot of that. Well, that's an inherent conflict of interest. How do you resolve that conflict of interest? You look back over 45 years of nobody ever being found of wrongdoing in a police force this large and this many people involved, and you say, really? Really? But there are other things that go on, that there are legal protections for police, etc. It's incredibly.
And there's an internal investigation that's being done, that is being done at the same time in parallel with a potential for prosecution, and that further complicates the matter as well.
Right, the internal disciplinary personnel processes versus a criminal proceeding, right. And those things, they have their.
I will say this, that the Ray Morrow ultimately.
He's a Commonwealth Attorney.
He's a Commonwealth Attorney, and he ultimately decided to charge the officer involved in the gear incident, and I think. Hindsight in all these circumstances is 20/20, but the key thing we have to realize is there were lessons that were learned in that experience. And if we as a county, shame on us if we don't learn the lessons. My belief is based on the work of our commission, John, that the department and the county is on track toward a further improved police department, and a police department that's.
Let's not jump to the conclusions quite yet.
No, well, let's
come back to your group, the group you talked about. the 15 or 20 people that were on your subcommittee, these weren't just, 16 people or 15 people cut out of a cookie cutter all the same. You had some interesting personalities in there. You said some folks with disparate interests, disparate backgrounds.
Yeah.
Sal Colosi, Sr., his son had been shot, killed by a police bullet, I don't know, 5, 6, 7 years before,
Right.
and under very questionable circumstances. It was almost a magic bullet kind of thing. A cop jumping out of a car, a SWAT officer. Why the SWAT officer was on the scene was never quite clear, because it was a low-level offense, not involving violence, not involving any presence of weapons, etc. And yet the SWAT team comes along. An undercover officer is questioning Sal Colosi Jr. I guess that wasn't really his name, he's talking with him, making a payment about an illegal bet that Mr. Colosi had apparently placed. Mm-hmm. And cop jumps out of the car, hits his hand as he jumps out of the car from 30 feet away, puts a bullet right through Mr. Colosi's heart. Now, the bullet was found in a different location from that, but put that aside. That was explained by a report of the chief of police that was issued to the public many, many months later. And if you want to go back and see it, see Chief David Rohrer, R-O-H-R-E-R, report to the community on the death of Sal Colosi. You can find it online.
Yeah, so this...
But Sal Colosi, the father, was on your subcommittee.
That's correct.
Also on your subcommittee, you had the president of the Fraternal Order of Police, Brad Carruthers, who's one of the most outspoken critics of this commission and of any kind of relationship with civilians. This is the guy who, when they saw a sign in the window of a retailer in one of the localities here, a Black Lives Matter sign. Well, he wanted the police pulled off there from doing any security duty for that place. He was calling for an effective police boycott of that because of that sign. So I don't want to go further into Mr. Colosi, but my point is, you had some interesting people on your subcommittee with whom you were going to work out all these difficult things and sensitivities. And I don't know, those are the only two that come to mind immediately. And you must have had others.
We had a retired FBI agent. We had two retired officers, police officers. One who's still provide consulting services to the county. Another who's just an incredible law enforcement background, who himself, as an African American, had some experiences with our police department that were troubling to him, and he brought those perspectives into the deliberations. We had a mother of a child, an older child, who that child had some experiences with the police, and brought that kind of that. So, and that was these
are emotional, life-changing experiences that some of these folks had that were on your committee.
And and I give Sharon Bulova credit, because she wanted to have this commission be a vehicle by which individuals who had these kind of experiences with our department, police department, the county police department, could kind of get down and try to offer recommendations on how to do things better. And so
in the final analysis, it was a very open process.
It was.
You had these people, but you also had the public having access to the meetings, and you ended up with people who weren't on the commission per se, but got involved and participated actively.
We had on average 10 people who sat through all of our meetings. Different, some the same, but a number different. But I always, when I ran those meetings, John, I provided an opportunity at the end of our meeting for the public to comment, to give us feedback. So they sat through 2.5, 3 hours worth of meeting.
No, I was very impressed with that process. I thought it was a great process.
And then the members themselves conducted themselves very well. But I have the highest regard for this, the willingness to step in and give articulate responses or raise concerns, challenge each other. The person trying to make sure that we keep making progress. Yeah. It's a challenge to keep it moving forward.
And you've mentioned that you guys had this charge, and you laid out you had this scope of work that you did, and that the police in parallel, Chief Rossler had done this, asked for this report analysis by this professional outside consulting group, which very much paralleled your work.
Yes.
And I think in the final analysis,
We embraced all the recommendations.
Your recommendation, their recommendations very much paralleled the same kinds of thought
Yes.
process as you guys.
They had
went through.
71 recommendations. We embraced all of them except one, and that had to do with how the police department uses their police vehicles in chase situations. They have a technique that they use. They train their officers to use to stop vehicles that are fleeing from a scene. The PERF recommended that use of that technique be stopped.
On safety, public safety grounds, yeah.
Our advocacy was a recommendation to the Board of Supervisors: give the chief an opportunity to convene a group of his experts, take a hard look at the use of this technique, and then recommend to the board a solution.
Out of 70-some recommendations,
It's impressive.
That's very impressive indeed that it was useful. I wanted to ask you how you would characterize the support and cooperation you got from the police department in carrying out your work, because you've given us your charge. We haven't really discussed your specific lines of inquiry, but a lot of what you were doing, you were looking at the day-to-day operations and how the police did their business, what their practices had been, and as you said, then looking at alternatives. So you needed to get into the police business a lot.
Yeah.
And how would you characterize the support and the cooperation you got not only from the chief, but the folks
Well,
in the
to
department?
kind of put some perspective on it, we were assigned a deputy chief, Tom Ryan, and he had...
He was on your subcommittee.
He was on subcommittee.
Okay.
But he had staff assigned to him to support our work. So, we had a high-level police department official working with us, and we generated, John, I think in the vicinity of 150 what I call lines of inquiry, or questions that we raised that then we asked the department to respond to, and the department was quite responsive.
I think we have a sample of some of the lines of inquiry. Let's see if we can get that brought up on the screen.
Well, there are some that you would expect.
There you go.
We asked for reports that had been generated by them. We asked for any analysis that had been generated. We wanted to understand what kind of lessons learned experiences they used within so if they have an incident, is there a mechanism that they use to learn from that incident so they don't repeat it in the future? We asked for, we explored the matter of barricades. Barricades are kind of a controversial topic. Somebody's out in the open field, and resistant to the police direction. How do you handle that circumstance? We explored the use of SWAT, the Strategic Weapons and Tactical Group.
So it's very much like a military force.
Yeah,
Combat military.
So kind of in responding to your question then, we asked a lot of questions, burdened their system, because they were committed to responding to each of the questions. Some were more detailed than others.
Right.
There were some questions that we raised that they simply couldn't provide the answers to because they didn't have the data. And gets
Right.
reflected back in our recommendations then, and that's saying, okay, well, if you don't have the data now, let's get that data so from this point forward, we can monitor, the county, the community can monitor what's going on and kind of hold you accountable if things start getting out of whack.
And I think one of the things we've found out nationally is that one of the things that's not happening, there are things in federal statutes that require police departments to report on, I guess, significant incidents, probably lethal incidents, everything from the circumstances to the demographics of it, who was involved, etc. And that to a very large extent, in a lot of cases, the police simply aren't doing the reports.
Mm-hmm.
Now, it's one of those things in government. Here's the catch-22. You get this thing comes down from the top and says you got to provide all this data, and then the people over here on the side provide the financing for the organization. They don't provide any wherewithal with which to do that necessarily.
Yeah.
And again,
I didn't
those
have,
kinds of things.
We didn't have the sense that the department was not responsive to federal obligations. In fact, I think quite the contrary.
No, I think there were some federal findings to this effect. When the press was asking the questions, well, how many of these incidents?
Right. Well, so one of the things that you know, it was interesting, John, as we were conducting our work, the police department was being responsive to the inquiries we were raising by doing what we were asking them to do.
They're actually pulling together data
Yeah,
they might not
yeah.
have pulled together
Right.
otherwise. Yeah.
And so, you know, and
That's
that was
interesting.
another, I think, value that this commission had, is that it did act as a catalyst for the department to act in certain areas. So back to the basic question you raised, was the department responsive? I believe that they made every effort to be responsive. They had some constraints based on just their past practice. They didn't collect information the way in which they did. And I'll be honest with you too, John, it's the kind of open, transparent organization that Chief Rossler is trying to move the department to is a change. And change is hard. Inertia is a powerful thing. We've always done it this way. And so if we want to do something different, the chief has to exert his authority, and it has to flow down through the organization and to have the outcome we're looking for.
This came up, this exact point came up in some of the meetings of several of the subcommittees, which came up in the larger commission. Periodically, the subcommittees would report to the larger commission. We'd have these full commission meetings. And one of the things that came through again and again was this: we need a cultural change, as I think is the way it was often referred to. There are a lot of things that are being done, could be done better, let's say, but they require, it's not the kind of thing the chief writes down an order and the next morning it's done, because these guys have been doing business a long time in a certain way. You got to change the culture, you got to change the way they think about their role and who they are. It takes you right back to the start, what you tell them they are as officers at the beginning, and I think you were one of the groups that found this out, but it wasn't the only one that I heard the same kind of information from.
So, but a significant part of our recommendations in this area of policy procedures and practices, we had a very detailed set of recommendations on changes to policy that we thought would be helpful in addressing this matter of culture. For example, the sanctity of human life was...
That's kind of step number one, isn't it?
It is. And I think if you talk to any officer on the street, they would, and I believe this, they believe that that's consistent with their current practice and belief system or policy framework. What we felt was important is to bring it up into the forefront, invigorate it as a kind of a organizing principle, and then have your use of force policies and practices organize and flow from that, which is, again...
so when a cop comes in day one, you say, by the way,
bet.
our number one
thing
is safety of your life. I will never forget, Phil, and this is maybe not fully related, but certainly partially related. We were having a discussion, I think, of this very point, in the importance of, in the recruitment process, that you tell people that, you know, if you want to be a policeman in Fairfax County, this is who we are, this is what we think, and how important this is. And Mary Kim was at this meeting, bless her heart, the publisher of the Connection newspapers. She was on the commission, she was at the meeting.
And she was on my subcommittee as well.
And she was on this subcommittee, as it turns out. Do you remember what she did at that point? Mary Kim held up her iPad, and it showed a picture from the recruitment page of the website of the Fairfax County Police Department, folks. And you know what the picture was? An officer kneeling in the dark, firing his weapon. There was a strong suggestion in that context, that's what the police department was about. There was a silence in that room like I rarely heard on the commission. The police were, caught out is one word, but everybody was just shocked and surprised. But it told the story. It captured right there. That's the culture, and yet that's what you're dealing with, and you got to deal with that.
Yeah.
But it was one of those watershed moments.
It was, and I do remember that very well. And it did inform our follow-up conversations within our subcommittee as to how, because we were looking at the whole context of use of force, and of course recruitment is an important front-end piece of that. We had a recommendation, John, that spoke to what we called hire to retire, a way in which one has sensitivities to who we bring into the police force, what life changes are they experiencing as they're on the force, and at what point do they move out of the force. And so because we all have different stages of our life that could affect how we view our responsibilities. And I think that was one of the issues that was in the Gear case, so with the officer involved in that. So the ability to help an officer who is having some difficult times, perhaps either
Right.
through some kind of a consultation, moving them out of a situation in which they would potentially be put in a use of force situation until such time as that personal situation is rectified. Those are things that a department has a unique responsibility.
The officer who shot and killed John Gear, in fact, was having something was going on in his marriage. He was under some psychological stress, I think it's fair to say.
Mm-hmm.
And the department didn't seem to have had a system for catching that and given that guy an opportunity to be out of an environment where he should never have been, and to be honest about it, he should never have been there that day.
So this is an example.
But give him an opportunity to deal with that, straighten it out. It shouldn't be the end of his career, but it should be something that you deal with and enable him to continue.
So this is an example where, John, the department does have a practice in place. It just wasn't working very well, certainly in that circumstance, perhaps in other circumstances. One of the things we did is we said, look, let's reinvigorate this. Let's make sure that it's a practice that, as a department, is consistent over the lifespan of officer service to the county.
So some of the things you've done, use of force policies, making them better, more clearer, better understood, easy for officers to deal with. Records, keeping records of what you do, and so you understand what your outcomes are.
Right.
Use of deadly force, this notion of a reasonable, what is it? Do you say reasonably objective?
Objectively reasonable.
Objectively reasonable.
Mm-hmm. Reasonable is the standard.
Level of force,
is the Supreme Court standard. We just
that you apply the force necessary in a situation.
Well, that so the officer is confronted with a threat to his person or her person or someone that the officer's sworn to protect. If the officer's threatened, he has or she has the authority to respond to that threat. Reasonable is the term that the Supreme Court uses to justify the use of lethal force in that circumstance.
And that's such an eye of the beholder kind of thing, though, Phil, in the final analysis. And if I'm the cop and I think that somebody might have a gun that could kill me in a couple of seconds, man, I probably err in a different way than.
Well, and this is where the department has stepped in and.
These guys have jobs. I think we all came to appreciate this as well. These are not people with run-of-the-mill jobs, folks. These folks have jobs that require an extraordinary amount of judgment, psychological balance, and it demands a lot of these guys because when they go out there, and the men and women, they literally put their lives on the line or have the potential to put their lives on the line for us every time they go on duty.
Right.
And not many jobs carry that kind of load. Kind of load.
Dallas, Baton Rouge are excellent examples of the risks that they are under. What the officers are able to do when given the training to be able to do it and the equipment to be able to do it is step down or step back from that situation and de-escalate it. So
that was one of your key findings,
right?
Wasn't it?
Yeah, so and we had an excellent example of this, of the department exercising this in an incident not too long ago where there's a beanbag gun, if you will, that the officers are equipped with, and it's not lethal force; it's just sufficient force that knocks the person off his or her feet. And in this instance, in that situation, this person actually had a weapon. The officers had positioned themselves to be protected, and then they used this tool to knock that person off the feet, and they were able to make the arrest.
And it turns out the officers do have lots of tools, everything from the talk tool to beanbags to tasers. There are lots of things short of lethal force. Time is going to come and eat us up if we're not careful.
Sure.
I want to get to three sort of specific things that you dealt with, among many, and it's hard to do what you did. The use of SWAT, body cameras, and ECWs, electronic control weapons or tasers. you think what do you think the proper order is? But I'd like to.
Well, let's start with the tasers.
And those were issues that were major.
Yeah, the tasers offer this opportunity for an officer to de-escalate or to use force, but it's a less lethal force. So rather than
and we agreed that it was less lethal, but not non-lethal. We changed the definition
yes.
there. Yeah, okay.
It's less lethal, not non-lethal, because we have obviously have incidents.
Patricia McKenna in the jail.
Yeah. And but multiple. We had a recommendation that an officer is not permitted to use more than 3 tased circumstances unless a supervisor gives the approval to do that. But a taser offers
it comes
a less
closer
lethal,
to being lethal as you get up to between 3 and 4. Is that what you're saying?
That's
okay.
So we see this as a mechanism. We called for what we call an all-carry policy, where all officers are required to have on their person a taser, so that if they are in a situation in which a taser would allow them to control the individual without use of lethal force, then that's better than using a gun.
But officers very widely do not carry tasers.
Yeah, it's right now it's voluntary. I have talked with officers who wouldn't leave the station without it. I've talked to others who just feel that it totally encumbers their ability to maneuver. They have tight space within their squad vehicle. And
they have utility belts that are loaded beyond.
Right.
Stagger the imagination, ladies and gentlemen. They've got, I don't know, 20 things on there.
Well, it's a lot.
Yeah, and it's the arguments I heard from the officers is, one, the technology of tasers is improving, but they fail a lot. They felt they were not a reliable device, and second is, it's too much. I can't deal. I've got too much, and it's hard to carry in addition.
Yes. And our recommendation on this, John, was, look, don't do anything without consulting with the officers. So if you're going to use an all-carry policy, if you're embracing that as we recommend, make sure that you consult with the officers who are going to have to carry out that order, to give them the opportunity to optimize it for them.
And let's be clear what we're talking about here. This is really important, because what that gives the officer is something that is pretty disabling, but it's short of a bullet.
Right.
And the fact that the officers are not using it is very, very worrisome. Most are not using the beanbags either. And yet you've got these things that stop short of a bullet. You got to make it work, but you're right. I think the point was, you got to make it work for the end user.
Right. Right. So let's talk about the SWAT. Police departments across the country have, a number of them have militarized. I don't believe our department fits in that category. I don't think the Fairfax Police Department fits into the category of a militarized police department. Our department has not accepted any of the
surplus
weapons from Iraq, and
a lot of the militarization is, if I can step in here just a second, around the country has occurred because as we go through these wars in the Middle East in particular, our military has been making available all kinds of excess war weapons to police forces, which in part comes out of the 9/11 catastrophe and the feeling that police forces should be ready to deal with these kinds of things. So here again, one of the things I found out about being a part of this is the police get caught in the middle in a lot of these deals. You're supposed to be able to deal with terrorists on the one hand, but you can't be militarized. It's a really tough act to deal with. In the case of Fairfax, I think it's fair to say they found they were overusing SWAT.
Yeah, I think we
had some examples
as a result of our work, and I give Sal Colosi a lot of credit for this aspect of our recommendation.
The gentleman whose son was killed by a police bullet.
He was focused on he was focused on 2 things: SWAT and the way in which guns are. Officers are trained to use guns and so on. But relative to SWAT, the SWAT is not used now. Is only used now if there's very senior authorization to do so, and there's a checklist the department has established that senior officer has to go through and meet before that deployment of that capability.
Very important, because we found in the case of Sal Pelosi's son, why was a SWAT team necessary? And it clearly was not. The big story broke while we were on the commission about poker games in Great Falls, of all places. They brought SWAT teams in to break up poker games among consenting adults who had no weapons, had committed no crime other than playing cards.
But their intelligence that came in was that this was a high stake, very high stakes, a lot of money involved, and each of the players, if you will, had their own protection. That was the story. It didn't turn out that way, but that's where this checklist it becomes so important, and it also takes it up to the highest levels of the responsible member of the agency.
Okay. That's another sensible recommendation. I think you guys came out with a lot of sensible recommendations, which if you took together and you took together the work of the other subcommittees, in my view, the work of this task force could really be transformational for the police department of Fairfax County. Others say, no, that's really probably not true. It might make incremental changes, but your view?
I believe it's transformational. It's taking an excellent police. With execution of these recommendations, it will take an excellent police department to that next level of excellence. I mean, we have to be proud of the department's work in protecting us, John. It's just absolutely. You can look at the numbers, the statistics that have been collected. You can look at the actual performance of duty. Outliers there are.
Crime statistics in Fairfax County support what Phil is saying 100%.
So we have one of the best departments in the nation. The fact that the police chief, his command structure, and the officers themselves are committed to being even more excellent, I think speaks well for them. So it's not transformational in the sense of a bad department being a good department. This is transformational of an excellent department being moving toward outstanding.
I would add something else we really haven't talked about, and was more out, not directly in your area so much, but the other thing that got us to this having a task force is police department was not being responsive. A lot of us in the community felt there was total impunity. Communications had broken down.
Yes.
There wasn't contact. They were not transparent.
Yes,
if
if you
big
look
area of emphasis of other parts of the task force.
There was actually the department, again, to its credit, did a survey of the community in a report dated in April of this year, and that was the finding. A key finding was, hey, we think we trust that you're going to protect us. We think that you've got the right ideals and expectations. But look, we don't feel good about the level of communication that we're receiving about what you're doing and why you're doing what you're doing.
The steel blue curtain was quite real in my humble opinion.
So your point is well taken.
I worked on the Independent Investigation and Oversight Subcommittee, and I think we're going to see some recommendations out of that will bring an independent auditor in, for example, to look at some of these, look at the investigations involving the death, lethal incidents, and providing for a civilian review panel, so that if there's conflict with the police on the street, there's access for civilians, for the citizens who pay the salaries of the police, to go and file a complaint.
Yes.
Now, it's also structured in such a way to be advisory.
Yeah.
And they're not empowered to punish police or discipline police, but they're empowered to review and then make public findings.
Right.
Again, it's a transparency, opening the door and letting the citizens see what's going on inside. And in a good police force, that's not a threat. That's in the final analysis, what the data find, I think to date, is that when these things come to a head, and when they're challenged, that the reviews are finding out in the vast majority of cases, the police are found to be on the side of right. They're exonerated in point of fact. But anyway, it's something that's needed.
So the chief has announced to the Board of Supervisors very directly, without qualification, that he supports both those recommendations. The board the other day in its work session on Public Safety Committee, there may be one outlier, but my read of the board members is that they're going to make these things happen, these two recommendations happen.
10 months after the report's submitted, what's the status of, some of us feel that there's been a little slowness on the part of the action of the Board of Supervisors. I would hasten to add that if you've been you've participated in any other kind of action with Fairfax County, like zoning, like starting a new business, etc., things always move slowly through this very huge bureaucracy. I don't know that they're picking on the Police Reform Commission. Your take on how expeditiously they're dealing with the recommendations, Phil?
From my vantage point for the use of force recommendations, I am very pleased with the attention that both the Board of Supervisors and the Police Department, Police Chief specifically, has given to our recommendations. I did a quick and dirty look at it this morning, and 27% of our recommendations have already been implemented. Another
10 months in, okay.
Another 56% are in progress or in process of being implemented.
Does that mean if in process that they've been approved and they're moving towards implementation, it's implementation that's not there yet?
That's correct.
Okay.
So the board approved those recommendations and directed the chief to execute against those recommendations, and that execution is now in process.
That also shows me, in fact, last time I checked in on this, I think that's substantial progress in the last couple of months. I mean, it seems to be picking up the pace.
Yeah, the Board of Supervisors is constrained by, these folks, they meet all the time and they have multiple responsibilities. The Public Safety Committee actually was reestablished with just last year as a result of our work. But that's a committee.
It hadn't functioned for several years.
For a long time.
Yeah.
So they're doing their due diligence. That's the thing about that's what we elect them to do. Commissions can make recommendations, but we're accountable to nobody. The Board of Supervisors is accountable to the community, and so I respect their exercise of their judgment. Can we do this? Can we not do this?
I take the community side on that. I respect their judgment as long as our oversight tells me that they're doing okay.
Yeah, but if they're not doing okay, every 4 years you get to make a decision about whether to keep them or not.
Doesn't work that way. That hides a lot of stuff.
But there is one area, just quickly, John.
Well, we got to close, so it's going to have to be very quick.
Body-worn cameras. It's a topic, perhaps.
Body-worn cameras, everybody think is the godsend solution. Right.
It's not necessarily a godsend, but it's going to happen. It's going to be in our. The technology is getting to the point where it's going to be easier to use. The data collection is going to be easier to store. We have to put energy into the matters of privacy, making sure that the laws protect people and protect the officers.
You got a cop wearing a camera, and he's walking around doing his job, and he's taking a picture of everything that's in front of him. And sometimes, that's going to be offensive to people, and it raises legitimate legal questions about privacy, for example.
You bet.
Not as easy as it would seem on the surface.
Not easy at all.
Phil, I just want the audience to know, I watched this gentleman do his job on that task force, on that commission for 9 months. And he was an outstanding leader. The community has a lot of thanks to give this gentleman. The use of force part of the commission was probably the centerpiece. Thank you so much.
Well, John, thanks for having me.
Thanks, and thanks for doing what you did in the community.
My pleasure, and thank you for your service.
My pleasure as well. Thanks, Comcast, Dan, Ruben, for putting us out there tonight. And most of all, thank you, our viewers, for sharing some of your time with us this evening. We'll see you next time on Reston Impact.